Here is footage of an actively dying person with his face hidden for privacy reasons. As we can see, his hands are gripping the bed sheets, a subtle yet powerful sign of his final moments. At this point, he was taking his last breath, and just 2 minutes after what you have just seen in this footage, doctors officially pronounced him dead. Whether we accept it or not, the truth remains that death is an unavoidable reality that we will have to confront sooner or later. There is no sense in rejecting it. It is beyond our control to prevent death. The Dalai Lama stated in August 2012 that humans fear death, and this is a contradiction. They exist as though they are invincible, as if they will never pass away. However, according to global data, 2 individuals lose their lives every second worldwide, and in approximately 105 years, the entire population of the Earth will be replaced. This implies that not a single person alive today will still be here in 2012-25. How can we be so certain that mortality will occur to everyone except ourselves? We continue as though we will exist indefinitely, yet we know with certainty that our physical form will perish. It appears that the concept of eternal existence has been embedded in humanity since the beginning. Perhaps we perceive the body as merely a temporary shell, a vessel that we use for specific purpose. The dread of dying is often linked to the unknown. People do not fully comprehend what takes place after passing away. They lack understanding of what lies beyond the boundary, and this fills them with apprehension. However, this subject has been explored in various ancient traditions. Many of them attempt to explain what occurs after death, and if there is knowledge and insight, then the concept of dying becomes a more comprehensible experience. For example, Vedic wisdom teaches that death is a multi-step transition consisting of 4 phases, which are often likened to the 4 stages of birth. These steps are parallel. Additionally, the Vedas state that there are 4 primary types of suffering in this world: birth, disease, aging, and death. The process of being born brings the most intense suffering. Falling ill, growing old, and eventually passing away are not as terrifying as entering life itself. To truly grasp this, we must understand how a person functions, including all their energetic bodies. The knowledge provided by science does not allow us to fully uncover this subject, so we will turn to the ancient Vedic scriptures, which have been preserved in the spiritual heritage of many civilizations. Nearly all of these teachings, in one form or another, suggest that in addition to the tangible physical body with which we usually identify, there is also a subtle energy information body, which represents our psyche. This ethereal body is composed of 3 key elements: the mind, the intellect, and the false ego. The mind is a delicate mental construct that gathers input from the senses and reacts accordingly. The mind operates based on the principle of attraction and aversion. If a person were guided only by this mechanism, they would be no different from an animal. However, human beings also possess intelligence, which is a more refined function, dictated by the concepts of morality, right and wrong, good and evil. Beyond intellect, there is an even finer component known as the ego. This represents our perception of self, who we believe we are. In this context, there are 2 ways to define ourselves. Either we identify as the body, or we acknowledge that we are something beyond it. Either we exist merely as a body, or as an eternally existing consciousness. We often say that we possess a soul, but in reality, it is more precise to say that we have a body. In this case, our true identity aligns with the soul itself. The fundamental reality is that we are not bodies experiencing spiritual practice, but rather spiritual entities temporarily experiencing physical existence. Beyond the false ego, there is an even more refined energy that extends beyond the material realm. This is our awareness, the vibrational energy of the soul. Based on this, we can understand that the soul is encapsulated within layers. It is enclosed in our ego, intellect, and mind, and all of these elements reside within our physical structure, much like a Russian nesting doll, Matryoshka. So, what happens at birth? The soul, contained within its subtle body, comes into contact with coarse matter, a fertilized embryo. Then, the soul enters a dormant state for 3 months, becoming unconscious. After this period, it awakens and lives its entire prenatal life over the next 5 to 6 months. If a person's destiny is to live for 70 years, then, from this perspective, they experience those 5 or 6 months as 70 years. We exist within this dimension as if in a dream, and the quality of this dream, the experience of life itself, is shaped by the mental and emotional state of the mother. This suggests that we begin accumulating experiences even before birth. But let's return to the 4 phases of birth and death. The first stage of birth is known as the oceanic phase, which ends when labor pains begin. Contractions have started, but the birth canal is still closed. This phase, where the current reality is dissolving, yet the next stage remains unclear, is often called the apocalypse. It continues until the birth passage opens. Then, the third phase begins, the light at the end of the tunnel, as the child moves through the birth canal. The fourth stage occurs once the child enters the world, but the birth process is still incomplete. A certain transitional period follows, during which the child lives through a predestined timeline where one day represents 1 year. If someone is meant to live 70 years, then this phase symbolically lasts for 70 days and is referred to as liberation. The Vedas explain that a mother observing her child during this stage can perceive insights about their fate. During this time, the newborn is in an extremely delicate state, and only after this phase does the birth process become fully complete. Once birth concludes, death begins. What we commonly refer to as our life is merely the initial stage of dying. At the cellular level, we can observe that each division cycle results in the shortening of telomeres, the caps on chromosomes that determine lifespan. Thus, the aging process and eventual death are programmed into the body from the very beginning. Now, let's explore the most intriguing aspect: the 4 stages of dying. The first phase is what we recognize as our life itself. Then comes the exact moment of death, which the Vedas describe in great detail. Initially, a living being experiences a heavy sensation throughout their body. The muscles lose function. Then, the body starts cooling, followed by an abrupt wave of heat. It is precisely at this moment that the subtle body separates from the physical form.
This separation is accompanied by the fact that the senses of a living being detach from the perception of vision through the eyes and hearing through the ears. A living being naturally falls into a state of isolation, darkness, and sensory deprivation. This condition lasts anywhere from a few seconds to several hours. Afterward, the being sees a sudden flash of white light and enters a state of oblivion for a while. Upon regaining awareness, it realizes it is still in the same room. From now on, we will refer to this living being as a soul. The soul sees everything, hears everything, understands everything. The world becomes brighter, more vivid, and more expressive. The thoughts and desires of living people are now visible. The soul sees its body, which it thought of as itself, lying next to it. The connection with the body is severed. The body begins to deteriorate. The soul understands that it is still alive, but now outside the body in a subtle form. It sees, hears, and understands everything, but no one sees or hears it. This phase lasts for 9 days, which is why it is customary to accompany the soul on its journey after this time. We already know this stage is called the apocalypse. The world is disintegrated, and the soul still doesn't know where to go. These 9 days, the soul stays close to its relatives. It is deeply attached to them and cannot leave. It's important to note that when you think of the deceased, according to the laws of the subtle world, they will be there in an instant. They hear and understand everything. During this time, you can still speak to your soul, say your goodbyes, explain something, or say what you didn't have time to during life, and ask for forgiveness. The deceased hears and understands you. You can even feel their presence. At the same time, the deceased is reflecting on their life, wondering how they lived. As a rule, everyone experiences the same regrets and emotions. These are regrets about missed opportunities. Someone didn't allow themselves to love. Someone wasn't honest with themselves. Someone didn't do what they loved. Imagine how much regret the deceased feels during these days. All of this lasts exactly 9 days. During these 9 days, the soul needs help and support from their family. The behavior of loved ones has a great impact on the future fate of the deceased. The traditional response involves tears and sorrow, but there is another, more conscious approach, one guided by knowledge. This understanding recognizes that a loved one has moved on, now existing in a subtle form. They still need help. Tears and grief only worsen their condition. It's necessary to remain calm and consciously support the deceased. The future of their soul depends on it. This is a contrast between two emotions and two approaches. The first one is self-centered, where relatives mourn because of their own grief. The second approach, which is more conscious, is centered on love and understanding. The belief that the deceased will rest and eventually meet love again. The soul is eternal, as are we, and the loved one has lived their life according to their script. Our job is to help them move on with love and strength. During these 9 days, a living being undergoes restructuring in both the subtle body and psyche, which requires energy. This energy can come from two sources. The first source occurs when loved ones don't know how to behave or what to do in such situations. In these cases, energy is taken by force, leading to exhaustion, depression, and a decline in the relative's energy. The second source is when loved ones consciously give their energy, typically through food. Many cultures around the world have a tradition of commemorating the deceased by offering food and drink. Everything that is consumed at the wake carries subtle energy, which is transferred to the deceased. In some countries, there is a misguided tradition of pouring an alcoholic drink into a glass for the deceased and placing a piece of bread on top. The premise is correct, but the form is wrong. Alcohol should not be part of the subtle body. It only carries negative energy. Similarly, meat should be avoided, as it holds the energy of anger, fear, pain, and suffering. These emotions remain in the meat and are transferred to the deceased when consumed. The ideal way to offer energy is through live, nourishing food. In many spiritual teachings, food for the deceased is prepared using specific ingredients. Boiled rice, seasoned with sesame seeds, curdled milk, or fruits and berries are commonly used. If you ask a priest, they will agree with this approach. Such food is blessed and presented to the deceased, typically placed in front of their photograph. The photograph is used to attune the family's energy to the energy of the deceased. After 9 days, the soul's karmic body develops, connecting the person's emotions to the external world. This is when the person stops perceiving the outside world, and the third stage begins. This is the stage referred to as the light at the end of the tunnel. It lasts 40 days and is mistakenly commemorated on the 40th day after death. In reality, the 40th day is the 49th day, which marks the soul's transition. On this day, the subtle body dissolves and the soul's attention shifts inward. The person reflects on their life's accumulated emotions, desires, thoughts, and relationships. This process occurs over 40 days and determines the future shape the soul will take in the next life. The Tibetan Book of the Dead says that the color of the light at the end of the tunnel determines the form the soul will take in the next incarnation. Blue light signifies an animal form, and yellow signifies a human form. There are thousands of species of life on Earth, and the soul traverses this tunnel, encountering the energy it once created, which may appear as symbols, metaphors, or images in dreams, depending on the energy accumulated in life. The meaning of these 40 days is essentially a revision of life, reflecting on mistakes, lessons, and a sense of the life lived. This stage ends on the 49th day, where the soul transitions into a state of liberation. The soul feels like an actor who has completed their role and is now resting before assuming a new form. The karmic script for the next life has been shaped over these 49 days, and the soul can see the life ahead, where it will be born, who the parents will be, and what significant events are destined to unfold. In certain cases, the soul still has the ability to choose its path. This choice depends on the state of mind at the moment of death and the focus of their final thoughts. This is the starting point for the fate of the next incarnation. During these 9 days, the framework for the next life is built, and during the subsequent 40 days, it is finalized. Vedic teachings state that the final thoughts at the time of death directly influence the soul's future existence. The concept of samsara, the cycle of birth and rebirth, underpins many spiritual traditions. It is generally seen as an unfavorable situation, one that must be escaped. Even early Christianity referenced samsara, although in a different context. But is it possible to break free from samsara? Of course it is. Death presents a unique opportunity for this. All that is required is to focus on God at the time of death. If one thinks of God at that moment, they will be united with Him. However, the final thought is always sincere and powerful. It cannot be replaced by another thought. To think only of God at the moment of death requires living a life aligned with God. The material for this video comes from the lectures of psychologist E.V. Jenny Couve. Let each person decide for themselves how closely this perspective aligns with their own beliefs. On this channel, my goal is to highlight a variety of viewpoints on perhaps humanity's most pressing question: what awaits us after death? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.